Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition. Welcome to another episode of My Body, My Bump, My Baby. Today we are sharing a beautiful birth story, and it's a little extra special because it's the co-host, Hannah's beautiful birth story of Mr. Oliver.
Finally. Taken a little while to get to this episode, I think.
That's okay. So, how do you want to start? Where do you want to start?
I think that, I think starting with my why and why I chose the birth, you don't really get to choose your birth, but why I chose what I wanted for his birth is important.
Or even back up just a little bit, like what did you plan?
Yeah.
And then why did you plan
I chose
that
plan is what I was kind of going for.
Yeah.
So this is a big one. It's a long one, I guess. My why is pretty big in why I do everything that I do. I'm going to tear up in this thinking about this, of course. And I'm pregnant right now. So, of course, I'm just going to be I'm going to give myself some grace and being even more emotional around things. But my why goes back to my own health. And it goes back to the health of, me looking forward into generations and understanding what health looks like for them. And so, for me, I was diagnosed with MS in 2019. And one of the first things that I remember asking the doctor when he came in and told me that, and my husband was there as well, was, are we going to be able to have children? Mm. And it's a funny question to ask, I guess, to some extent, because with MS, yes, you are going to be able to have children. But it's actually, and he even brought up the point, you actually do better when you're pregnant and because of the way that your immune systems work. So, backing all the way up to that diagnosis. And that was a catalyst for me to make a lot of shifts in my life of how I operate from a health perspective and a life perspective. And so all of the choices that I made throughout the pregnancy and birth process were tying back to looking at not only my health, but also the health that I was choosing to be able to, what I could control for my baby,
right.
My unborn baby. So before I even got pregnant, I had heard about the birth center, and I had told my husband, that's where we're going to have our baby. Because, and we had recently moved to Colorado Springs. And so for me with my MS diagnosis, I had a very allopathic experience in the very beginning. I was in the hospital. I had an MRI. I was diagnosed with MS with a couple of other treatments, spinal tap, all that stuff that they do.
You did a spinal tap?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Doctor was great. I had two different doctors. I got passed from one neurologist to the other. The first one I absolutely loved. He was a little bit more with me in some of my challenges later on down the road of how I challenged him with some of my knowledge. But I had that allopathic experience. And I didn't love the hospital because of it overall. I just didn't love allopathic medicine. And at the same time of my diagnosis, within 24 hours, I was introduced to functional medicine. And that was by truly the grace of God, because my cousin's wife, who also is named Hannah.
Oh, wow.
It's just a lot of funny things that aligned at the same time. She was working for a functional medicine doctor at the time, and I had never heard of it. And when they heard about my diagnosis, they reached out because functionally, there is the belief that disease, it doesn't just come to you. It's not just genetic. It's not just something like that. Like the genes load the gun, but your environment and your lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Right.
So that's not only food or supplementation. That's also your stress, which I was very stressed. That's your sleep. Has to do with toxins in your environment, all of that stuff. And so I started really digging into that lifestyle after my diagnosis and making a lot of my treatment or lack of treatment choices, lack of allopathic treatment choices, and based off of my knowledge that I was learning there. And that's how I became a health coach too.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
You were just kind of like thrust basically into this new life like that, like poof. And then here you are with this diagnosis, and they are usually very pushy and aggressive about like, these are the things you need to do and you got to do them fast. Otherwise it's going to get worse. And so you're just like thrust into this world where you're all of a sudden like, holy cow.
Yeah. And having to make a bunch of choices.
Yeah.
And I had to have a backbone. And the company I was working for at the time, one of the leadership principles was have a backbone, but I don't think I ever truly learned to have a backbone for myself until I was diagnosed with MS. And I think that has transpired into my ability to have a backbone in motherhood, which, and in my birth, my pregnancy, and in my birth, like what I was planning for my birth and what happened with my birth. And I mean, like I said, it was God giving me a shove ahead of time saying like, you're going to have to figure this out before you have kids. Wow. And so it was very special to me to have that experience. And people probably wouldn't describe that experience very often of being diagnosed with some chronic illness. But it was very special for me to have that ahead of time because it was a catalyst for a shift in my life.
Right.
And so I did everything that I could ahead of time, ahead of getting pregnant. And I think it also kind of just like boosted our timeline for pregnancy. And part of that was because in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, if it's good for your body when you're pregnant and you have these autoimmune things going on, well, I want that piece of my healing process too. So it felt like it sounds a little bit selfish, but I just did tons of research on the hormone piece and the shifts of hormones in the body when you're pregnant and how that can be helpful in healing. And I also looked at this like brain piece of your brain turns like just how your cells regenerate, like your skin regenerates really fast, like
right.
the fastest organ. But like your brain regenerates, the cells in your brain, they regenerate every 7 years. So I just got into my head when I started doing research of, well, if I can have a pregnancy and then nurse with those hormones, and then I choose to have another pregnancy and nurse, I might get to those 7 years where I'm kind of like reshifting my body and my mind. And we talk about this a lot, and like from a spiritual perspective too, of like when you become a motherhood, you essentially are like breaking and starting over again.
Right.
And this is kind of the physiological piece of it, and the scientific piece of like the brain restarting. So that was why I'm like, okay, well, we should get pregnant. But I also knew that I wanted to be off of birth control, which is a whole other thing. We could do an episode on birth control. We probably should.
We should, yes.
And I knew I needed to re-nourish and like replenish my body from a lot of the nutrients that I had lost. And I wanted to give myself at least 6 months. If I were to coach someone through this, I would give them 18 months to 2 years just because of what I know about the nourishment and like the replenishment of nutrients. But I gave myself like 6-7 months, and we got pregnant. And from there, that's when I kind of dove into the birth world.
Right.
And I knew what my birth choice was and where I wanted to birth, but I didn't know all of the ins and outs of it yet. And I started that catalyst was like really prenatal. I just was so interested in yoga, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a prenatal yoga training. And that's how I met B.
Right.
And that's where I really began to learn about all of the various choices, also the stages of birth, not just physically, but also like emotionally and spiritually. And I continued to gain my backbone. There were choices that I knew that I did not want, not choices that I knew. There were interventions that I knew that I would not touch over my dead body. That's the way to explain it. And so in all of the choices I was making throughout the process and that my husband and I were making throughout the process, it related back to that and to the health of myself and my baby. And the biggest thing is I wanted a vaginal birth. And I wanted a vaginal birth without antibiotics because antibiotics had shot my system down so many times. And that was like the the cream on top of my MS pie, basically, of like diagnosis. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of other things that went into it, but I knew antibiotics, how they impacted my gut health each time and what would happen.
And that was
in my body.
That was through treatment of the MS that you had experienced
before I was diagnosed with MS.
Oh, before you were diagnosed.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, I mean, there were some other things that happened, and I was treated for something else after diagnosis for MS, and I had a new flare. And that's why I'm like, okay, I know the antibiotics impact me in a very terrible way because my gut health is not to the level that it should be. And there's a time and a place for antibiotics, absolutely. They're life-saving, but that's how I see them now for me. Like, they will be life-saving. I will do everything else before I get there.
Right.
And so I also wanted my baby to have a peaceful birth. I wanted to have the least number of interventions possible because of his health. I wanted him to be able to get a good seeding start. So we talk about seeding the gut health. I was really into gut health at that time. I wanted him to get reap all of the benefits that I had been working on pre-pregnancy and during pregnancy. And I didn't want anything to intervene in that, in his way.
Like just trying your best, however you could do it to ensure that he got the best start possible, which makes so much sense because, sometimes we're asking why are these little ones sick, right? And it could be something that we do at the very beginning that can prevent that. So giving them the best start possible.
Mm-hmm. And when I worked for a functional doctor, I mean, I did my health coach training while I was pregnant, while I was still working for my corporate job at that time. And one of the first questions we ask is, 1, did you have a cesarean? 2, were you breastfed and how long? And the sickest of the sick were always the ones that had a cesarean and or were not breastfed or only breastfed for a very short period of time.
Interesting.
And so for me, and just in my training too, and you can watch documentaries on this, we've talked about this in some of our episodes too, but there's not you can't, if you're born via cesarean, you have a higher risk chance of disease down the road or sickness down the road. Same with lack of breastfeeding. Yes. So for me, those two were non-negotiables, the breastfeeding as well, which I did. Well, we can get to that, but I did everything in my locus of control to make sure that we could breastfeed.
I get that. I totally get that.
Yep. So I mean, pregnancy was great. It was easy. It was during COVID. And we've talked about this a little bit on the side, but the stress that I had during that pregnancy was very low in regards to bringing in other people's energies because no one was around. And
lockdown.
To be honest, it was really nice.
Yeah.
I walked 5 times a week. I'm like, how often do I walk now on this one?
This one you have a little one that you're running around chasing. So
not the same type of exercise. No.
But it does bring up a point, know, that we talk about, at least in the prenatal yoga class, is, first-time moms, cherish this because it only happens once. Even if you're trying to have multiple babies, the first pregnancy only happens once.
Yeah. So incredible. But I mean, I walked every day. my stress came from work, and it was still the chronic stress that I knew wasn't serving me well from a lifestyle perspective when it goes back to like functional medicine, all looking at that too, that functional process. But it was still way lower. I mean, not way lower, but it was just a very different stress. The energy, you weren't around people. You didn't have to deal with people if you didn't want to. Yeah, you had the fear mongering going on in the world, but I also like kind of just let that go over my head during that period of time.
Smart.
Yeah, it was really, really nice. I didn't have to travel anywhere for a baby shower. And I know everyone's like, well, can we have a baby shower for you? Like, I would have loved that, but the travel's not easy when you're pregnant. You just don't, it's just switching up your environment. So I really enjoyed that experience. And yeah, I think that's about it. I wasn't pregnant then. We had it was before COVID too that I was pregnant, but it was relatively easy. I was nauseous a little bit first trimester, hid in the basement, dark. It's where I like worked from there for a little while, but it was very chill, I would say. Like all of my appointments were it was very normal. I felt very empowered in my decision making. I enjoyed getting to know the birth world at that time. And I geeked out over things related to like pregnancy, nutrition, and all of that stuff. And that's kind of why I'm in this world now.
Yeah. Okay, so you knew how you wanted to birth. You've had this amazing, beautiful, I want to say peaceful pregnancy. And then you had an idea of like, okay, I'm birthing at this birth center. Clearly, I don't want a bunch of interventions.
Yeah.
Besides enrolling in the prenatal yoga teacher training program, what other things did you do to prepare for your labor?
Yeah. So I did hypnobirthing. So my husband and I did hypnobirthing, which was great. I had learned the majority of that from prenatal yoga. I mean, not hypnobirthing necessarily, but the birth education. I think it was great for my husband to see, but he also was seeing this firsthand in his training, like his didactic training at the hospital. So he got to attend a few babies' births pre-Oliver being born, I think. So that was cool for him to see that.
That is super cool.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he attended one unmedicated at Evans, and then I think a couple others. And so he saw differences and things as well. And but the hypnobirthing piece of it was nice to calm my mind during pregnancy. Now, I'm not quite sure if I used that. I don't know. I didn't go into hypnosis during birth in any type of way, but it was nice, like when thoughts would pop into my head that were negative or not serving me, like even during pregnancy, I had like the way to turn that around in a very easy way. It's very yogic already.
Right.
Yeah.
It's literally, I think, I don't know. I always toil with this because I'm a yogi and a birth worker, and I've always toiled with the idea of it being called hypno because I don't really believe that it actually is hypno. It's actually mindfulness training.
Yeah, it is. It's mindfulness. And it was really nice just to have that reiteration again. And I had just done yoga teacher training, well, prenatal, yes, but my other training within the last 2 years. So it was at the forefront of my mind.
It was a continuation of something that you have been learning and practicing.
Yep. And I wish that this is where I wish that things had been open to be able to go to like prenatal yoga classes and more yoga classes with people. But I also was still able to get into my own space on my mat at home because I had my personal practice, which was great. So I did prenatal yoga myself. I did, and I just listened to my body and what was working, what wasn't working. And I also did, I I did like the Bloom Method videos, some of those, which was really nice. I mean, you kind of are stuck at your house during COVID anyway.
Right.
You don't have an option.
Right.
So I did those and another preparation. We had a doula that was great. And so I don't remember what week you start meeting with a doula, but
It's different
she was
for
great
everybody.
to have as
Yeah.
well. Yes. So we met with her ahead of time, and I made a really intense birth plan of everything that I didn't want, basically. That my birth plan, I think, was basically like what I don't want.
Really?
I don't know. I don't fully remember it, I guess, but I just remember putting a lot of things on there that were, because I'd use like the pictures one of like everything that I didn't want. And at the birth center, you talk in depth with the midwives ahead of time, and you're planning, or at that point in time at least, we were planning. Like they asked a lot of questions ahead of time, and you would go through and make choices by even like 36 weeks of things that you wanted or didn't want for baby. And so the plan was more for if I had to transfer to a hospital, here, hand them these pictures and hopefully they can decipher that it says, I do not want Hep B for my baby.
This is a good clarification. So what you're saying, you didn't have a birth plan. You didn't actually need a birth plan for the birth center because they knew
I
what
wanted
you were
water.
after.
Yeah.
Right. So basically you had a transfer plan.
Yeah.
So if I transfer, these are I understand that I'm transferring for a reason and I need some interventions, but there's like levels.
Things.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Like, don't touch me with that, basically.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
If I have to have a cesarean, I want to swab my vagina ahead of time.
Right.
Like that type of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that was what I did. And I researched everything also for baby ahead of time. Because I think a lot of times, or not I think, what I see with women a lot of times is that you get shocked into making decisions in your immediate postpartum for your baby because it's what allopathic medicine considers as the standard of care. And there were things that I knew from a health perspective that I didn't want
100%
my baby to have.
Right.
And so at the birth center, those were all presented to me in a very informed way to make an informed choice of here are the benefits, here are the risks to this, which is oftentimes left out in conversation, I think, in other places, or lack of conversation. And then here are some of the alternatives.
Right.
What do you want to do? Let us know ahead of time. We're going to document that. So therefore, when your baby is born, we know that we will not be giving him the hepatitis B shot.
Right.
Or like those types of choices.
Right.
So I didn't have to make any of those choices afterwards. And I knew exactly what was going to happen or what wasn't
Which had
going
to
happen.
make it a little bit
Less stressful.
I mean, you knew that those questions were coming. I think a lot of people don't know that they're coming, so they probably don't have any stress or anxiety about it until it hits them.
But
and they're
how
like,
often? Like the thing is those questions don't come up ahead of time with the hospital care.
No, they don't.
No, and so
No.
you're there and like we're going to give your baby the hepatitis B shot. Wait, what? What is that? What are the risks to it? What are the benefits? Like, why am I getting this?
Right.
Like that type of thing. Like if I had been in my immediately after birth being asked those questions, I would have been kind of like
Overwhelmed.
shocked.
It's
like,
overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I did all of that research ahead of time, and it just calmed. It just made like the last month very calming. And I took off the 3 weeks prior to his birth from work.
Oh, that is so
Yes.
smart. I love that.
I'm going to do that this time too. Just I want nothing planned.
You need that slow down period.
Yeah, you want nothing planned. Because I swear, if people have stuff on their schedule, that
Baby
baby
stays.
knows they stay. They
sure
stay.
do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so with my husband coming, he'll be. We'll get into that for this birth later on. But so it was very great, and I had nothing going on. I cooked. I just did fun stuff for that period of time, and the day before Oliver's birth, we went to Breckenridge, and I remember being on the phone with my dad, And being like him saying something along the lines of, well, what happens if you go into labor there? Tony's in the car with me and he's like, we would just drive back. I mean, it's only 2 hours away, like whatever.
Baby's not going to just fall out.
Exactly. Basically, you don't have to go to the hospital when you have one contraction, or surge or whatever you want to call it. But and I wasn't going to the hospital. Yeah, my dad probably was thinking I was. I'm kidding. But funny enough, I started having surges in the car on the way to Breckenridge.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they were pretty, I mean, we started timing. It was every 11 minutes. It was very like consistent in that sense.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, great. But we still went to Breckenridge. We went to the distillery there. We were just planning to grab lunch. We had the dogs with us just to like.
So it was a day trip?
Yeah, it was a day trip there. Just like for lunch and to take the dogs out or whatever. We didn't end up going on a little hike because, so we had lunch there. I remember there was another group of people outside sitting there and they're like, oh, how far along are you? We both are pediatric nurses.
Aww.
I'm like, I'm 39 weeks tomorrow. And they're like, oh, you haven't dropped. You have plenty of time.
And you're like,
little do you know, I'm like having
labor.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't say that, but so it was funny and ironic. And so we made our way back, and I remember that's when I did text our doula.
What time was it then? Do you remember?
I started around 9 a.m., those contractions.
But then you got back, and it was what time?
Well, we made our way back we got back by 4 or 5 because
nice.
I texted the doula, and she made the recommendation to like, when you get back, take a bath, maybe have a glass of wine. So I took that as we're stopping at a brewery and having a beer.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, we stopped at a brewery. I had a beer. It was great. At that point in time in my life, I was also gluten-free mostly. And so I'm like, I'm having a nice IPA.
Nice.
Yeah. So I had a beer. I think we got back around 5, but I had been having the surges that entire time. The alcohol, I think, did slow it down a little bit, but the bath is what really – I remember I took a bath, I think, around 7 when we got home. Like, we got home, took a bath around 7, and – that's when it like truly slowed down to the point where I was able to go to sleep. So I went to bed around 9.
So she was wanting you to get some rest.
Yes. Yeah, wanting me to get some rest. Which to some extent I'm like, let's just get this show on the road. But yeah. No. After a full day, I'm glad I got like 3 hours of rest. Woke up around 12:30 a.m. and like, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to be sleeping anymore. So I got in the shower because I love water. Usually, or warm water usually. So I got in the shower and started, I mean, my surges were coming more like faster than that 11 minutes had been. And I don't remember how often they were coming, but I do remember like my husband texting Lauren, who was our doula, and just like chatting with her about that. Her recommendation again was like try to get rest. I don't think the shower really slowed them down necessarily, but I did get out and try to lay down. And once it got to like 6 or 7 a.m., I think that's when we were both like, screw the rest piece. It's just not happening. Like it really was not.
It was progressing.
Yeah, it was progressing. Yeah. It was progressing, but it wasn't progressing in a textbook way that everyone tells you, like the 2 and 5 or whatever that is.
The 1 and 5.
5 or whatever. Yeah. It wasn't progressing like that. I still had my mucus plug. My water clearly had not broken, which doesn't always happen. We've learned that. And I was kind of just ready to get up and moving. I like movement, and I wanted that in my body.
So you were just kind of laying down?
Was trying to rest and like moving from one side to the other.
Nice.
And that's how I was experiencing my surges. So I got the surges on both sides like that, and a good amount like rotating, which was great. But I needed to be upright, and I felt that. And so I think that was when then I started to take a couple of like a walk around the block a couple of times. I'm pretty sure my neighbor is like, you were just like hanging onto the tree. Probably thinks about that when he sees me. I'm like hang onto the tree and surge. And so we did that. And then
you were literally a tree hugger.
No, seriously. Yeah. In a little neighborhood. And then it still didn't feel like it was moving along at the pace, like into that pattern that would be expected for it. And so Lauren recommended, she wasn't there at the time yet either. Tony was just in contact with her, recommended getting out the breast pump. So I did that, and that thing hurts like heck when you are not ready for it, I guess. That's the best way to explain it.
It hurts your breast?
Yeah, and you're already so tender right then. Yeah. But it worked. That got my mucus plug out. So it started moving stuff along. But it got a little bit intense to the point where I remember, and this was maybe around 11:30 that came out, around 12:30. And I had been eating during that time. Tony was feeding me like flatbread, stuff like that. I don't know, soup, I don't know, whatever was there. And I was drinking fluids, doing all of that. But I remember laying in bed around 12:30 in the afternoon and just telling him, I want to go to the hospital because I want drugs to sleep. I don't want an epidural. I just want drugs to sleep. He was like, I don't think you want that. So I think it's probably time for us to call Lauren to come over. And which he did. And at the same time, just based off what he was describing of my movements, she recommended the Walters. Walters, is that what it is? Yeah. And she explained it to Tony. And Tony and I were both like, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think I'm going to have Tony do that for me, basically. Like, obey Tony in that sense.
Well, you were tired, and that actually requires you to be moving from one position to the next position, which is...
And Lauren came over, though, and she did it. You do it for, we did it for 3 surges, and she's like, it's only for 3. And it made whatever movement was needed happen in my body and with Oliver. And he, I remember feeling kind of a pleasant shift in that. And then, so she came over, she was there around 2:30. Lauren had Tony take a shower. I walked around the block with her, and she also had a student, like a mentor there too, which we had talked about ahead of time, which was really nice actually to have 2 people to hang on to.
Right.
So we walked around the block a couple of times. Tony took a shower. I think he was supposed to rest, but that didn't really happen. And then I remember coming back and being like, I just need to get in the shower again. I just need to get in the shower. And Lauren said, okay, do you want to get in the shower or do you want to go to the birth center now? And I'm like, oh, cool. I can go to the birth center. That means that I'm 7 centimeters because I had talked about that with her, like about the timing around it. And so in my head, I'm like, oh, great. Moving along. So I'm like, well, I want to go to the birth center. I don't
need to stay here anymore.
Yeah. So we got the car ready, tried the front seat, got in there, said, heck no.
Horrible.
Laid in the back. Yep. Laid down in the back. That was great. Tony did a phenomenal job driving there. Everything slowed in the car. I think I had maybe like 2 or 3 surges throughout that entire period.
But at that point, it was probably a nice rest.
Yeah, it was a really nice rest. Yep. And throughout this whole process, whenever I would come out of surges, I remember being like humorous, I guess. I'm like sarcastic humor. Who knows? And at the birth center, I remember being greeted by Kate and then Lizzie, who I was thrilled was the midwife.
She's the best.
Yeah, she was someone that I connected with the most, Lizzie and Amy. And so I'm like, great, this is like meant to be. This is like who was on call at that time, because this is a Sunday evening as well. So we got there around 5, I think, 4:30, 5-ish maybe. And while they were filling so listen to the heart rate. And that was the only time I cried. I I don't know, I'm tearing up thinking about it right now. But like, because when Lizzie listened to the heart rate and was like, everything's good. And I'm like, yes. Like I just like had a huge like piece of relief that I didn't realize I was holding on to, of like tension that I was holding on to, just like release. And while they were filling up the tub, I did just walked through the halls. No one else was there either. And when I say halls, it's like
it's a small
3
place.
or 4 room place. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one I was asked, so when you're in labor, you oftentimes want to shift your positioning and not be surging in the same positions, because that's also helping with the movement of baby's head or butt in the cervix, right. And making sure that you're not just pressing in one spot too often, which is why back labor does not make sense. Like when you're on your back does not make sense in any type of biological way. So there was one position that I had been avoiding the entire time, they realized, and that was like leaning back. Mm-hmm. And so that was another thing again that Lauren was like, you want to just like take a few walking one surges and just like lean your full body weight into Tony, like back.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, Tony. And so I remember doing that before, or successfully, I think, before getting into the tub. And then I remained in the tub the whole rest of the time.
Well, the nice thing is in the tub, were you kind of leaning back then?
For a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I got on hands and knees for a chunk of time. But yeah, I loved the straps. Like holding on to like the straps from the ceiling too. That was really nice. And in the tub, I don't think I was in there too long prior to transition. I know I was in transition, and I like mentally knew this because I started vomiting. Like that was my transition, was just like getting it all up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had just been convinced to have fruit snacks by being told, like, these are organic fruit snacks. I'm like, oh, I'll take them then. I don't know why. But I just had those too, and then they came up. But that wasn't too long, and Lauren had put essential oil into the bag, which was really nice actually. And I don't really remember the sensation of those surges. I just remember throwing up.
Oh, that's really good.
I know. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. And that's how I just know it was the most intense. And right after that, I looked at Lauren. I was like, I have to poop. And she's like, that's your baby. I'm like, oh
yay.
Okay, cool. And so I pushed for about an hour and a half, and the surges it was slower, but they were more intense. But again, I don't recall them being unbearable comparatively. They just were longer. Mm-hmm. With a longer spaced out time in between. And I didn't really push until the end. And this gets me now looking back on it. But at the end, I do remember being told, like, on the next push, your baby will come out. So I took that and I internalized that as, I've got to get this baby out on the next push. So I truly pushed them.
Oh, yeah. So in your mind, you were like, oh, baby's got to come out on this one.
Yeah. 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 And I was like, I was competitive with myself around it. Yeah. And so rather than slowing down and allowing my body to do it, that's when I'm like pushed out. And I pushed his head out. And then, which was really cool sensation afterwards, because then baby spins.
Yeah.
And you like are feeling this like spinning going on.
It's the weirdest thing to look at too. I never considered how it must feel, but it's also really odd to look like, because it's actually a very unnatural looking movement.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. If you like look at births going on.
What is going on?
Yeah. But then like the head is the most challenging part. And then after that, the baby just like pops out on the next surge.
Yes,
1 to 2
the
surges.
whole body.
Yeah, the whole body just pops. And that was weird, because I'm like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? And I was on my hands and knees at this point in time too. So Oliver floated up. Yes. Tony was able to, he caught him in the water. And
he caught him in the water?
Yep. And my water had just broken pre his head coming out. Yes. So he would have been like on call or whatever. Yes. Yeah, which would have been really cool. But there was also that sensation I had when my water broke. I'd prefer my water not to break.
It's dramatically different.
It's a very different like intensity in your body. Yeah. And there's a purpose for that water. And yes. I understand like yeah. I remember Kate has photos of the sac coming out and then like going back in and coming out. Like I have that in the video, which is really cool to see before the water broke. And so Oliver came out and we didn't know what gender of a baby we were having at that time. And so I remember me asking like, is it an Oliver or whatever? Because we were thinking boy. And Tony was like, it's an Oliver.
Oh,
he's an Oliver or whatever.
He's an
Oliver. Yeah, he's an Oliver.
Cutie.
And he handed him to me and we got him breathing and he let out some cry. But he was very, very calm. Probably too calm for their liking to some extent. But he was very aware of what was going on. Like his eyes were all very open and he's been like that since that like first moment. His eyes have just always been like very big and open and aware and bright and never like that dazed baby.
Right.
I guess
yes,
is the way
very
to explain
alert and with us.
Yep. And so then I got out of the tub holding him the entire time. Made my way over to the bed, and this is like a birthing suite. Like it's like a bedroom. It's beautiful. They have beautiful spots there, like places there, and you choose where you want to, like which room you prefer, etc. And I birthed the placenta. I think it took me about 30 minutes-ish. And then I got assessed for tearing. I mean, I wasn't feeling anything. You're in this oxytocin high.
You're not feeling any like big pain or anything.
Yeah, and I did have a 4th degree tear, which was super surprising to everyone.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, great, I'm going to be transferred.
And so after all of that beauty.
Yeah, after all of that beauty. Yes, exactly. But Lizzie did a phenomenal job at, I think she kind of like to some extent was giving them ultimatums of like, no, she's bringing the baby and she's bringing her husband and she's bringing me, like the midwife. And so we were able to have our golden hour about like, I think we had about 2 hours before I transferred. So all of the baby checks were done at the birth center. We had like that time like connected to him. And then I was able to transfer with him, with Tony, with Lizzie. You have to remember this is in August 2020, like during COVID when they had like no visitor policies. Right. And your baby was your second. If you chose to, your baby was your second person.
Yeah. Right.
And so they didn't like, I think it's probably because it was at night and she knew the OB on staff. So they allowed us all in. I didn't have to wear a mask, which was incredible because I'm not going to do that with my newborn baby. That's just not. No, so, it's like they like are reading your like lips and your face.
Right.
And that procedure I was in and out of the hospital within an hour and a half.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So fast.
So you didn't get admitted. You didn't have to stay.
No,
it was
we were still like we were still home within 4.5 hours of his birth.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yep. He pooped. He did all that stuff. So it was very, very normal. I wouldn't change anything about his birth because he's here and he's healthy, but I still would love not to tear.
Oh, yeah.
Again, but I've also done it and now I've done the rehab to it. And it's one of those things that, again, like that catalyst going back to the MS thing, like this was a catalyst for me to learn a lot about my pelvic floor and a lot about pelvic health. And maybe it was like healing for me to be in that hospital for an hour and a half. I don't know.
And it'd be a positive experience.
It was a positive experience. do sometimes I got a little sad about like lacking the ability to baby wear my baby on long walks within the first like 6 to 12 weeks. But again, that's like when I talk to people, when I was talking like even the midwives about that, they're like, just go sit outside and enjoy just doing nothing.
Right.
So there was that piece of it.
And you kind of like in that first 12 weeks, less is more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Less is so much more.
It also forced me to slow down. I was big
yeah.
on like the first 40 days already, but it really forced me to slow down even more. And then breastfeeding was challenging. Initially. And I should go into this story sometime, maybe somewhere else, but maybe not. I can just share it real quickly. My thing with, so when we didn't really get him to latch truly in the hospital or at the birth center. And I had expressed colostrum ahead of time. And but within the first 24 hours, we had a lactation consultant come out. Oliver was extremely tied. So we did all of the body work possible. We worked with the lactation consultant. We did craniosacral. We ended up feeding him through with the colostrum syringes, but through one of those passy doses or whatever initially. And the body work did help loosen him up. And I remember when he first latched, I was like 2 days later after some of the body work. But it wasn't going to like significantly hold on. And so on day 4 or 5, we did, after doing all of the body work and everything, we did have his ties corrected with Dr. Jessica Martin, who did a previous episode with us.
Right.
Go back and listen. It's phenomenal. And it was a breeze from there. But the first 5 days were a lot. Tough. And yes, we did have to do stretches and make sure that we kept up with the ties and like fixing the oral tethers. But after that, it was easy. And I nursed him until, my milk dried up basically. Well,
how old was he?
27 months. Yeah.
If you could share one thing with our audience, mamas to be, that might be helpful to them, what would you share? Tip, advice, anything like that?
Educate yourself, and don't expect others to educate you on your choices for birth and your choices for baby after birth. Putting your trust fully into someone that doesn't know you internally, spiritually, emotionally, physically is probably one of the most challenging things you're going to do for yourself down the road. And instead, if you put your trust into yourself, educate yourself, and use your intuition. We always talk about brain. Like, what are the benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition? Sometimes doing nothing is the right thing. But if you use that acronym and you learn what you need to learn and you make those choices ahead of time, you're going to really think yourself down the road.
I think that part is like the initiation into motherhood. Yeah, I mean, it really is. You need to start taking those steps for yourself and for your baby, and it starts in pregnancy. It doesn't start when the baby is in your arms, and I think that's huge.
And it's always changing
bit of advice.
too. Yeah, yeah. So just have that trust in your own self, and that's going to get you far.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing Oliver's birth story. So beautiful. And I'm so glad that it all worked out. I mean, 4th degree tear is kind of it's not something anybody wishes for, but I think, knowing you and kind of making an assumption about what that birth plan was that you had in your mind, I think that's the best kind of intervention that you could have hoped for, because everything revolving Oliver happened the way you needed it to happen.
Absolutely.
And this other piece was just for you, and you could deal with it on your own.
It was like another lesson once again.
That's yours.
Yeah, exactly. And it also taught me some things I'll do differently next time. And so.
We hope you enjoyed this beautiful birth story, and we hope that you continue to join us for future episodes. Until next time, have a happy, healthy day.